We're 2 minutes past the hour, so I think we should slowly get started. So thank you for attending this webinar. And as I forgot to mention to you that this webinar is recorded, and after this webinar, later today or tomorrow, you'll receive an email with the URL and whatever is needed to access this recording. So no need to worry about anything that you might have missed, and that will be provided to you. So to get started, the webinar today is the top 3 Oracle e-Business Suite extension with Oracle APEX. And it's kind of a spin-off of a blog that we had published a few weeks ago, if it's not more, about what are the use cases of Oracle APEX or extensions that you can do on e-Business Suite with APEX. And we decided to take this blog and put it into a webinar, especially for the web ADI part, which I thought was a really good use case to show how something that is fairly complex to set up in EBS and often has a chance of failure because of all sorts of reasons due to Excel. How you can do that with APEX, and that's just one use case, but I thought it was a quite interesting use case to show you. So a little bit about the content of this webinar. We're going to give you a little bit of an overview about myself and Insum. A few slides about APEX. For those of you who don't know APEX that much, we'll just give you a couple of slides indicating and talking about what APEX is all about, and what is APEX in the context of EBS, an EBS environment and EBS development. We're going to recap on these top 3 use cases that we were talking about, and we're going to go through a demo, which I think you're going to find very interesting. I had a lot of fun doing it myself, and then we're going to conclude on this for today. So a little bit about myself. So Sylvain Martel, I'm an Oracle e-Business Suite APEX Practice Director here at Insum. I'm the leader of that development group dedicated to EBS for APEX development, and also responsible for the creation and the maintenance of that EBS-APEX integration package that we have developed over the last 2 years. I'm a presenter at Collaborate and different regional conferences also, and towards the end I'll be able to show you a couple of our meetings and conference where we'll be showing some new material. I've been an Oracle e-Business Suite consultant for many years. Actually was also a SAP consultant in a previous life, and I've touched a lot of things from development to functional to sysadmin to project management. So I have a pretty broad knowledge of the e-Business Suite platform, and I've been a APEX developer since 2007, but excuse me, mainly since around for about 3 years now. I've been involved with Insum on a full-time basis, merging APEX and EBS. Insum itself is a team totally dedicated to the development of APEX application. We have our main office is in Montreal, Canada, but we have offices in the United States, in Plattsburgh, New York, and soon in Peru to be announced very soon. So we're going to be also touching the South American continent very soon. So we have consultants pretty much everywhere in Canada and the US. We have over 50 developers dedicated to APEX, but also business analysts, DBAs, web designers, and so on and so forth. So we have a very broad team that can help you with all your business development needs. So a little bit about Oracle Application Express. For those who don't know about it, Application Express is a rapid application development framework dedicated to the development of desktop and mobile web application. used to show and maintain your database data related to Oracle. APEX only works on the Oracle database. And I think the best feature of APEX is actually for your development team. It leverages your SQL and PL SQL skill and database capabilities. So in order to create those web applications, you don't need to learn Java, you don't need to learn CSS, HTML. It certainly helps at a certain point, but to get started, all you need is a SQL statement and some PL SQL anonymous block if you want to do some processing or DML activities on the database, all that into a web page. Oracle Application Express is a no-cost feature of the Oracle database. So you paid your license for the Oracle database, you have APEX. The same way you have SQL Plus, APEX is a no-cost feature of the database. You find it on any database edition from XC to Enterprise Edition. So for those of you who have Oracle e-Business Suite, chances are you have a fully paid licensed database Enterprise Edition, so you already have APEX, or at least you have the ability to use APEX without any licensing fee extra. Of course, APEX is also on the cloud, so if you go to apex.oracle.com, you can create your own workspace there and have fun with it. And most of all is it's really easy to install. The installation process takes no time and is totally independent of the life cycle patches, family patch, or version of Oracle e-Business Suite, but yet complement each other very well. The architecture of APEX is very simple. It's a 3-tier architecture. So I'll start backward. I'll start from the database tier where you have your Oracle database that is obviously the container or the host of APEX, where the APEX engine resides, and APEX is basically a set of tables and PL SQL procedures and functions that are executed inside the database and generate your page, process the request that you have asked, and render the pages. It relies obviously on a couple of database schema, including, in the case of EBS, a workspace that is attached to your custom schema where you can see your tables without any other configuration to do. On the middle tier part, you're going to have a WebLogic server or Apache or Glassfish that will be running there in order for ORDS, which is the listener. It's called Oracle REST Data Services. And what that ORDS does, it listens to all the HTTP requests from the browser, send it over to the APEX engine, a process is executed, and then the result is rendered back to the browser. So ORDS is doing a few things, doing that broker of HTTP requests, but also is able to provide web services. So you from that platform, you can either be a web service provider or you can consume web services as well. So that becomes really interesting in the EBS world to have another way of either consuming web services or even exposing some data from EBS very easily through this ORDS service. So that was a very, very brief overview of Oracle Application Express. We have a bunch of other video webinar recording on our website that you can go and see if you want to know a little bit more about it. But I just want to at least provide an overview. Now, since we have APEX, well, what does it do for us in an EBS environment? So in EBS, everybody will say, you know, you try to use EBS as vanilla as possible, as standard as possible, using the business process that have been defined. But everybody knows that every organization needs to have some custom development done, either for interfaces, because you know you're going to have some external system that will stay around EBS that needs to either receive or send data into e-Business Suite. So you need to create some interfaces in order to get all the different system in sync. Of course, reports are like probably one of the major source of customization or extension because the reports from the ERP are just basic. They're not related to any specific organization. So you need some reports for your specific organization. And nowadays, dashboards are very popular and trendy, and for a good reason, because if you run a report, that's fine, and these reports can be pretty long. But dashboard, the trend nowadays is that dashboard shows you what you need to focus on, and then from these dashboard, drill down to the transaction and look at what are the issues that you have to look for. And then, of course, mobile. Devices are now pretty much all mobile, and then we're going to show a couple of slides about that. But this is becoming very popular. The users are needing it. The organization want to go that way. So these are the different use cases of APEX development in an EBS environment. And of course, transactions with other system, either at your corporate level for all the other things that all the other operations that your organization is executing, or nowadays with cloud application or services like PayPal and so on and so forth. The architecture that you already have in your EBS, and this is a slide that's related to 12.2. That's why we see WebLogic. Well, this is pretty standard, right? So you have your web browser, which is your client, which will run either forms or OAF pages, and you need a little applet there to make form happy. And then on the middle tier, either you have a WebLogic server or you have OHS if you're on 12.1 or older version like 11i or 12.0. And this is where your form server runs, your report server runs, and your Java engine and so on and so forth. And your database is just your container of the data. So if you want to add APEX to this mix, what we recommend, and there are many ways to do that, but what we recommend is have another application server right next to it. Now, this application server doesn't have to be very powerful, but as I mentioned earlier, the Oracle REST Data Services is mainly just a broker of transaction and the render page towards the client. So it doesn't need a lot of CPU or RAM. Well, this is going to be running on an application or web server. So here, of course, this slide from Oracle suggests that you use Oracle WebLogic, but we have good success with Oracle Glassfish or even Tomcat for those who are used to these type of web services. And then finally, APEX resides on the database where eBusiness Suite is. So this is all supported, all recognized by Oracle. So there's no gimmick here. Everybody at Oracle support will recognize that, and this is a good way of making sure that you have access to the data, and that will generate some very quick applications. From a database schema point of view, when APEX is installed, it generates or creates a couple of new database schema, and one of them is APEX 0500, and of course this is version Y. So if you install the new APEX 5.1, you'll have the schema that has the appropriate version number in there. And what we have in that database schema is, like I said, all the tables and all the PL SQL in order to run the APEX engine. And against this database schema or workspace, now that we're looking at from a developer point of view, then the parsing schema or the default database schema that is attached to this could be your XX schema, can be another custom schema like we have here in this example where XX APEX is a new schema that we have created. And that's all flexible, and depending on the preference of your organization, you can mix and match. What's really important here is that you never have the app schema being your parsing schema or default schema. This is a big no-no, and you won't be supported if you have such an architecture. That opens up the list or of all the tables and APIs way too much, and there's other ways to do that. And I'm not going to get into this right now, but if you want to have a discussion with us regarding this, we'll be more than happy to set up a call. But really, this is the recommended solution, and you'll be supported with Oracle if you do it like this. Now, that is nice and dandy to have APEX in EBS, but you need a little bit more than that, and that's where Insum comes into play. So in the last 2 years, we have developed an integration package that will do two things. First, it will use the credential from EBS and generate like a single sign-on sort of thing, so that when the user are connected in EBS and want to access an APEX application from the navigator in EBS, they won't have to enter their username and password or some credential again. Most of you who have used APEX before know that APEX somehow needs some authentication. It won't let you go in and look at some data in your database without any sort of credential. So when you create APEX pages and application in the context of EBS, you don't want users to repeat username and password. So we have created the single sign-on, which allows you to jump into an APEX page and make sure that the authentication is all secure and authorized. And the second fold of that is once you're in APEX or an APEX application, you need to recreate the EBS context, which means from the user and responsibility that you've used to connect and jump to this APEX application, you want to recognize the operating unit. You want to recognize if the responsibility has been set as a multi-org, if the user security are recognized as well. So depending on the responsibility, you can exclude some function so you can recognize that into an APEX application. And of course, the profile options of all sorts that will impact the behavior of your application. On top of that, we provide EBS-APEX starter application. What that means is that if you have 12.1 or if you have 12.2 and you say, APEX is nice, but the look and feel is not what the user expects. They expect to see the same e-business suite type of look and feel. So from a change management point of view, the users feel comfortable. It's not a different color and so on and so forth. So we provide that for you with all the code that is required for the single sign-on and the integration package to be fully functional and recognize EBS context. Also, we have, and it's not necessarily a product, but we have some module that allows you to provide to the users the flex field that you have defined for your data object. So for example, if you have, if you create an invoice screen and for the invoice header you have a flex field defined, well, we can bring this over to APEX and it's not hard-coded. You won't have to go back if you change the flex field. It will read the configuration of the flex field and bring it up to you dynamically on an APEX page and allow your users to enter the information that those flex fields are required. It will be context sensitive and the same behavior as you have in APEX and EBS, but in APEX. And if you want to know more or contact us about what we can do for you in terms of EBS and APEX integration, go on our website on that web page, and you'll see the details about our offering to get you up and running on EBS and APEX and get all the components that I just mentioned ready to go, so that way you can start your development of APEX in an EBS environment in a safe and secure way. And that was like a 2-second sales pitch here. So let's go back to finishing off on APEX development in an EBS environment. And this is kind of important to understand the true security and authentication part of EBS and APEX with our offering and our code. This is a little animation of how from EBS you will be jumping into APEX. So assuming that we want to click or use this APEX simple invoice, which is an APEX application, the function behind will call a PL SQL function to ask a single sign-on repository, which is just a bunch of tables in PL SQL table that we have put together. So it's going to say, well, I'm EBS 12.1.3, for example, like a partner name, and I want to access AP001, which you can translate as a application short name, for example. And if you're allowed to access this application from EBS, the single sign-on repository will say, okay, fine, here's the URL you need to redirect to. And this unique URL, which is defined by the last part, which is a big token of these numbers that is totally uniquely generated, will be created only once for this time where you click this application. So as you redirect, you're not going directly to the APEX application, but you're going to a second level of validation where a dispatcher application will say, okay, I have this token, and I've been called by SMartel, let's say, and this dispatcher is going to ask the repository, am I allowed to go to the target application, and where is that target application? So the repository will validate a few things. Of course, are you the user that called me at first? Is that URL been used before? Is there a timeout that's been exceeded? And a few other things. And if everything validated properly, then the repository will say, okay, you need to go to application 104. So then the dispatcher turns around and logs you into application 104 and also brings with it the user ID, the responsibility ID, and the application from where you were calling. So this is really important because that's the basis of the authentication between EBS and APEX. So once you are in there and you have the user ID, responsibility ID, and application ID, then the second part of our integration package, recreate the EBS context, into the APEX application, which is, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, the validation of multi-org from the security profiles, it establishes the default operating unit and the profile option, and that becomes the foundation of the APEX or the EBS context within APEX. Because as you know, APEX uses a concept of connection pool to read or render the data from into EBS. So every time you go and submit or render a page, you create a new SQL connection, and all these components need to be part of the connection, so you recreate the EBS context all the time. Now, we have put a good foundation for our discussion, I think. The top 3 use case of EBS extension with APEX. Well, the world is changing. So desktops are now tablets. I've seen so many people that now they don't even have a laptop. They have a tablet, and they have a little keyboard, a Bluetooth keyboard. That's attached to it. So the big they're almost the tablets of a couple of years ago, and they're all connected, they're all robust, and they all use HTML, or they can display HTML pages. So nowadays, users want to use these devices in order to interact with the data that they have to work with. Either they're remote from the office, or even within the office, they will use these devices. And what about the future? Watches are like probably the next thing, the Internet of Things. So we don't really know where it's going, but one thing for sure is that the application that you have to create in terms of either in-house needs or business requirement needs for your users inside the organization or outside the organization, they have to be flexible enough in order to recognize these new devices and other that will come in the future. So the old technologies or the current technologies, especially in the EBS world, they come short a little bit. So Oracle Forms, well, you need Java applet. So tablets, phones, it won't really work with that. And browsers start to get they drop the support for these Java applets, and of course patches will come out and whatnot, but definitely not the right way or the best way to go towards some new development. And Oracle reports, well, again, they come short in the sense of there's no interaction that is possible, and you always generate a piece of paper. So So e-business suite, the word says it. It should be e-business. So when you generate a piece of paper, that's not e-business. Oracle OAF and ADF, they're probably closer in terms of development to what the future holds. But on the other hand, you need a lot of Java knowledge, and you put a new framework in. And I was a developer before, and I still am a little bit. And I'm very comfortable with SQL and PL SQL, but not really into Java. So these are the new things that I would have a hard time getting into. So here's my list of top use cases. First of all, dashboard and interactive report. So as we see here, dashboard and interactive report, that's the trend. Like, that's what the users want. That's what the organization want, for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that if you look at a report and you have to look at multiple pages and whatnot, you're probably wasting a lot of time finding the issues, and that's really what the user want to do. Like, I want to fix the issues. So if you have those dashboards, and in this example here, this dashboard is basically a carbon copy of an Indica screen. Well, you still can do that in APEX, right? And these graphs and these diagrams, they're really easy to generate in APEX, and you can drill down with an interactive report and see what the transactions are that compose these issues, if there are any issues, or at least what makes the number behind the transaction that are behind these numbers. And there's no more piece of paper, because a piece of paper, as soon as you have the piece of paper, the data is like technically obsolete. Whereas if you go on the screen, it's always up to date. And that's why APEX running on EBS is really important, because it's always looking at the right data. And drilling down to the transaction, and for those of you who've used interactive report, you know how easy it is for the users to take the data that has been provided by a developer. Of course, the developer has to, as usual, provide the right SQL statement to make sure that they have the right data. But once you have that data, then you can play around with it and really use it to satisfy your business needs. The second use case are data entry screens. So to facilitate the casual user to interact with EBS, you probably need to have some sort of a custom entry screen. In this example here, we have payable simple invoice. Well, many organizations, and I've been a witness of that, they don't want to have 1,000 users going into invoice workbench. It's too big. There's just too many information there. The quick invoice screen is ugly and doesn't really work for all the users. So, instead of, again, sending a piece of paper to your payroll department, why not create a simple screen where the users can enter the info? It's already in EBS, and your payroll department just need to process this. The other I found good use case is, for example, inventory movement. The inventory module, whenever you want to transact on the inventory, there's always 2 or 3 screens to go through, and depending on the configuration that you had put inside your EBS instance, it will never change. So why not put some sort of a screen in front of you to protect the users from these multiple screens, but behind the scene execute the same business process? So APEX allows you to do that very easily, because it can talk to the APIs of EBS. It's an interface table. It can do insert and so on and so forth, but also at the same time provide the user with a great user experience. And finally, and I've seen that many times also, it's a great way to combine data from various sources. So you have an external order entry system where you want to add some EBS info into it, and your personal data all combined into one screen. There you go. You can create quickly an an APEX application, and then again, post these transactions into EBS and use it to continue the business process. And I think the final one that's really popular use case is interface and data management, because, and probably my top choice too, because your external system are always there. So either if you want to do a monitoring of what's coming in or what's going out, APEX is a good application. Easy to create applications that will display data from an interface table, from a staging table, and so on and so forth. So that's a good use case. But the best one is WebEDI. WebEDI, because it's easy for users to type in their information, upload it into EBS, it's a popular choice. Unfortunately, it has some drawbacks. And it's used for so many things, like GL transaction, supplier information, inventory levels or items, and many, many others, HR as well. And they try to, with WebEDI, you try to facilitate a business process for the users, but often you have issues with, Excel, not the right version, and so on and so forth. And what APEX would allow you to do is distance yourself from the version of Excel or whatnot. So, and this is what I'm going to present to you. And this is just an example, not a product by any means. But these are ideas that you have to keep in mind and show you how APEX can help you out. So what we're going to do here, we're going to have no connection between EBS instance and the Excel spreadsheet. We're going to drop a file into a drop zone, so there will be, I don't care about the Excel version as long as the file is in XLSX format. I'll be able to read it. I will have no influence from my Windows or OS X regional setting, language, what have you. I'm only interested by the content and not by the container. And by doing this, you will not be influenced by patch or version upgrades. Only your regression testing will be needed because you'll be using some sort of an API or interface table. But because I'm not going to have an interaction between the Excel spreadsheet and my EBS instance, if I go from dev to test to prod, or if I have a new patch or a new version upgrade, and I go from 12.0 to 12.1, these won't have any impact, except if, of course, my API changes. But the connection between that EBS instance and the Excel and all the macros in it is gone, and that's what I try to do. So let's show that demo, and once again, this is just a prototype. It's just to give you ideas of what can be done with APEX in the context of EBS. Now, before I show you the demo, I have a couple of acknowledgments to make, and it shows you how flexible APEX can be in any context, but especially in the context of EBS. So I'm going to be using a drop zone, a plugin from Daniel Hochleitner. Hopefully, I pronounce his name well. And Daniel is an independent consultant in Germany, and he does a lot of APEX stuff. And one of the things he does, he's a really good contributor of plugins into this website called APEX World. He's actually one of the people that helped put that apex.world website together. And this drop zone is a fantastic plugin. So you'll see in the demo. And the second is Anton Scheffer. Anton is an Oracle consultant in the Netherlands and works for AMIS. And what they do, they're specializing in all sorts of Oracle technology, but specifically what Anton has done is a PL SQL library that allows you to read and create Excel spreadsheets from PL SQL. So really interesting here. So let's jump into that demo. So let's see here. So we're going to go into EBS. So here's my EBS navigator. And I didn't do a very good job of putting my WebEDI application into a custom responsibility. I just added to the general ledger super user. I shouldn't be doing that, but I felt a little bit lazy today. So here's my APEX Web ADI application. So a little review here. As soon as I click on that function, you see this is in my APEX application. Looks a lot like an OAF page, but also it read the information about my user, my responsibility, and where I am, so that I'm recreating the EBS context. So all that single sign-on thing that was quite long in describing. Of course, it doesn't take long here to execute. So here, what we're going to do is take a file, and let me show you that file. I think I have it here. I'm going to just move that down here, and I'm going to use a file, and I'll call it I called it miscellaneous journal entries. And once again, this is just a prototype and then some ideas that I had. And I created an Excel spreadsheet, which actually came from a Web ADI component. So it's very similar to a Web ADI journal entry. But I remove all the macros and all the ties that it had to eBusiness Suite. So just again, as an example, what you can have is an Excel spreadsheet that has some details here, and then a summary, and then you want to upload this summary. And this will tell the application an upload into Vision operation, because I'm using Vision here. And I'm going to upload an adjustment into for December 1st into the December period for just an adjustment that I make. And grant you, I'm not a GL specialist by any means, and I'm not a guru at Web ADI, but I just think that this is a very good example of to show you how it can be done. So what we're going to do, we're going to take this file, this Excel spreadsheet, we're going to drop it in that zone, and we're going to upload the file, which will create a transaction. So let's see if all I'm just saying here will work properly. So I'm using this file, and then I can drop it into that drop zone. So what the plugin allows me to do is read that file and put it into that container. At that point, it just sits there in a collection in APEX, and I have to put a little bit of code in order to read it. But what I'm going to do when I click this upload file, I'm going to read that file, bring into a record that becomes a blob. The PL SQL library will read the Excel spreadsheet, extract the data that I want. I will import it into a GL interface table and execute the concurrent program to import it. So let's see how that works. So I uploaded my file. My file is over here. Now, bear with me here. This is only a prototype. I should have probably shown a message saying that it has been uploaded properly, and here's the concurrent request that has been created. But you know, these can be done in a more complete application. In this case, I haven't done it, but what I can do is show you where it went. So let's go into Enter Journal, and we're going to look at Spreadsheet and the category adjustment, like this. And I believe the period was December 2016, so from the previous month. And sure enough, my transaction is over here. My transaction is unposted. So depending on your organization configuration, you can decide to automatically post a transaction or wait for someone to come and post it manually. So that's all up to you. But in a way, if I review this journal, I have my transaction right there. So here's my transaction for $201, and these are my Vision operation, my adjustments, and so on and so forth. So everything that I've done in order as a user to achieve this is come over here and drop my file. Now, let's see. Now, I haven't practiced this part here, but let's see if I'll dare doing something. So just to make sure that we're not telling lies, what I'm going to do is put a value that corresponds to the time of the day. So right now here it's 1:41, so 13:41. And we put 13:41 here. So here's my file, like this. And this is for the 2, so still for the period of December. So if I close this, 13:41, this is this thing. It's just been saved. That's fine. I'm going to move it over here. Upload the file, and I'm doing that one at a time. But the plugin allows you to put multiple files in there, and it could be read one at a time. If I click the upload button, The file has been read. This is December 2nd here. Now, if I go back to eBusiness Suite, first of all, I'm just going to make sure that the concurrent request ran well. So now it's pending, and because it ran, what I did in Apex, I executed or submitted the concurrent request without waiting. I could have been waiting for the concurrent request the concurrent request to be done and then give back the request ID to the user. But in this case, I just say run it and give the control back to the user. Now, if I go back to my screen and do search on spreadsheet adjustment for December, sure enough, 1341 shows up. Very simple, but effective, and that can be applied to a lot of different things. It can be applied, like I said, to maybe inventory, physical inventory counts, can be applied to creating suppliers from an external system. It can be basically everything you can think of that can be uploaded through an Excel spreadsheet to facilitate the upload of data. Now, let's go back to our PowerPoint presentation. So again, in this very simple use case, what we did is we brought the file into the drop zone, and that becomes a blob, sorry, not a blog, a blob in a record. You read the blob field using the PL/SQL library that Anton Scherer provides. So I can read that Excel spreadsheet that's now a field in a record. I read this info into a staging table. I read the staging table and insert the record into this GL interface and execute the program, the concurrent program in Port Journal. That is as simple as this. Apex allows you to do that. No connection to anything. If that file contains a large amount of transaction and you want to try it into a dev environment, you drop it in dev, you like it, you drop it in test, you like it, you drop it in prod, the same thing happened. You try to decouple as much as possible that Excel spreadsheet and your different instances, and you're happier. So, in conclusion, as you might understand, there are many use cases of which Apex can be used to build EBS extension. To me, the reason that to use Apex to satisfy these business requirements are, it's easy to install and configure. It reuses your organization skill set, as you know, and I mentioned here in this case, all I've done is use a plugin that somebody very clever created and some PL/SQL library in order to read the Excel spreadsheet. It's totally supported by Oracle, and by that I mean the configuration of adding Apex within EBS. Of course, your customization, you know, if you call Oracle, they say, well, we can't help you there, but that's standard throughout EBS customization development. And it simplifies patches and upgrades because you don't have to worry about, in this case, Excel macros working with a specific instance or a specific version or a patch set. So from a business point of view, changing functionality can be done rapidly and a very, very low cost. Now, before I open it up for the question or look at the question that you guys have put in, a few announcements. First of all, we're going to be, Insum will be present at Alliance 17, which is the conference for higher education user group at the end of February. So we'll be there. We'll be presenting a vendor session on Tuesday, February 28th. And it's about Apex application related to the education system. Martin D'Souza will provide the first part of that presentation, and I'll be the second part. And you'll be also able to meet the expert. We'll have a communication coming out in the next couple of weeks, or a couple of days, sorry, where you will be able to reserve some time and talk to an expert at our booth. Also, we're going to be at Collaborate. So for those who are EBS users, I highly recommend you register to go to Collaborate, which is the user conference for OAUG IOUG, and Quest. So Oracle Application User Group is our organization that we sponsor, but not sponsor, but part of, I guess I would say. And we're going to have a huge presence at Collaborate this year. I'll be presenting 3 different sessions. Patrick Cimolini, Oracle Ace, will be presenting a session there as well, and Francis Mignot, another Oracle Ace and some CTO, will be talking about APEX and the cloud. So very interesting presentation, and other APEX application presentation as well, and a lot of other things related to eBusiness Suite. And final announcement, ODTUG. If you're interested in APEX technologies, you have to go to ODTUG. It's a very huge conference related to Oracle technology. APEX has a immense track. We send a lot of speakers at that conference also, and it's a very, very good place to learn about different technologies, ideas, and how to use these technologies to the best for your organization. On that note, and that beautiful landscape of Montreal, we're going to turn it to some questions that we have in our Q&A panel. So I'm going to start from the beginning, and Roland has a question, and the question is WebLogic the advanced web server, or is this just an example? WebLogic, let's talk about EBS first. WebLogic is the only, which you probably already know that, is the only web server you will use on 12.2, and that's why it's showing on that slide. As for APEX, you have a choice, either Glassfish, Tomcat, or WebLogic. The reason, of course, this slide was showing WebLogic. We took this slide from Oracle, and they like to push their product, right? So WebLogic is their main product. But at Insum, we had very, very, very good experience with Glassfish, and Tomcat is an excellent choice as well. So for those who know Tomcat, it works really well. These are 3 products that works great for that. Second question from Mohammad: do we need to create synonym in APEX schema to access custom schema or app schema? That's a very good question. Yes, you do. If you are creating an APEX application and you want to display or interact with the tables that you have in your custom schema, you're right there. There's nothing to do. As you know, in an EBS environment, tables that you have in your custom schema have to be granted to apps. So that there's no changes there. So that's the same thing. Now, of course, when you set up PL/SQL packages and that are located in apps, and you have tables that are located in your custom schema, you have to provide the appropriate grants and synonym in order for either an application APEX application to use a PL/SQL, or your PL/SQL in apps to use a custom table in your XX schema. Well, yes, you need to create some synonyms and some grants for the object that you'll be using back and forth. Another question from Miroslav. In my invitation, this session goes as the EBS Web EDI replacement. Did anything change? No, I did a very long introduction, as you saw, but the example that I provided was fairly simple, as you saw, and it wasn't the purpose of this session was not to show the technical background behind it, which I could do in another time, but just to show that there are different use cases of APEX application, and Web EDI is one of them. And as you can see, it's very easy to install or set up. So that was the introduction that took a long time. Another question from Roland. Just for the sake of argument, I just wanted to mention that since APEX 5, we left the EBS look and alike team and introduced the universal team, almost. Everybody is very happy with that, and as a developer, it's more fun as well. And you're totally right, and it's much more easier to create your theme with a universal theme to either make it alike EBS or totally different. What I can say is that when we come into your organization, and if you want us to install and validate the APEX application, what we do is to make your life even simpler. We bring in some templates that have been already kind of converted or showing the colors either of 12.1 and 12.2 using the universal theme. So that way you still have the universal theme, but it shows like EBS. Of course, nothing prevents you from showing the Vita or Vista colors that APEX has by default, or to have your totally custom view of an APEX page. This is totally up to you, but also we're bringing values to your users by having the CSS style sheet already done for you for the EBS application that you'll create. Another question from Mohamed, how we will be using standard API. So there are many ways, I guess, to do that. What I recommend is to wrap your PL SQL into custom PL SQL or procedures or function and grant these custom objects into the custom schema where APEX is going to run. Now, once again, there are many ways to do that, but the main takeaway here is that your standard APIs, for example, here the standard API was this concurrent program. Typically, you'll never just use this. It will be packaged with some code to set up the environment or the context of that concurrent program that you want to call, and then you're going to have some code to wait for that concurrent program to be done, and then send back the request ID that you had generated. So all this, you would typically do that, you would create a custom objects, and if you need to call that object, that procedure, let's say, directly from APEX, then you just need to grant that procedure into the custom schema, and APEX is able to run it. The big advantage of doing that, if anything changes in a future version, all you have to do is change that procedure. APEX won't even know. So you have eventually 5, 10, 15 applications that are using these custom objects or these custom procedure. You don't have to go back into the 15 different applications and make change. You only change that procedure, granted that the changes are fairly minor. But at least, like I said before, it decouples as much as possible EBS and APEX so that your maintenance is easier when you have patches and upgrades. Question from Stephen, is the demo available for download or can it be accessed on your site? Actually, this is just like fun for me. It's not a demo, it's not really a program or a product. It was more for giving you guys ideas of what can be done with APEX, adding a library that somebody has done and a plugin available on the apex.world that somebody very clever had created. So, and I don't pretend or I don't assume that this prototype would work in your environment or in different circumstances. But surely I'd be more than happy to talk to you and see how I can quickly help you out figuring out what needs to be done. So drop me a line on my email at smartel@insum.ca, and we'll have a conversation. Thank you very much, Gary, for your note. Abbas, how about for APEX application that you need to be accessed from external or outside of EBS environment to users? What needs to implement for APEX application with external EBS users? That part is more, I would say, infrastructure more like, because what you need is the ability from the outside world or outside the firewall to call this URL. So essentially, if we remember the infrastructure that you saw, what you would need is like some sort of an Apache outside of the firewall that will receive the calls from the outside world, and this Apache would have a link to the web server or RDS, and only that communication between Apache and ORDS or that web server Glassfish would be allowed, and that would expose your APEX application to the outside world. One of the best examples that you can see for yourself is the Oracle Store. So if you go to store.oracle.com, the application or the page that you see there is an APEX application. And that APEX application is, of course, accessible to the outside world, worldwide, for all, in multiple language also. But behind the scene, it's an APEX application connected to EBS. So that is the best example of how you can provide some outside view or a page to the outside world for APEX. So that's only from an external point of view or our architecture point of view. Of course, you would have to define your requirement in order to say if you want to do, let's say you want to create your own iSupplier website, then how do you work with the credentials and the security, which can be used. You can use the same EBS security as well, even if you have a EBS login, that can be done also. But definitely, just architecture-wise, it's an Apache outside of the firewall that communicates inside. Another question to Abbas. Oh, I should have read that better. To be clear on my question, for EBS application that you need to develop for users that are external user and that are not your EBS users. And actually, that's a kind of a second fold. So the architecture is one thing, and for the authentication, then you would have to decide what kind of authentication you want. And if I bring back my example of iSupplier, what you do, you create your user inside the EBS. They're defined as a supplier type, and then you give them user and passwords, and that's how it would work. When they see the EBS or the APEX application with a login, they would enter their EBS username and password. The APEX application would validate against FND user, and if it works, then it let them in, and your APEX application shows whatever needs to be shown. Dorjan, could you show how you map Excel's fields with interface table column in your example? Is it complicated or not? It's not very complicated, so I know we're running out of time a little bit, but I can do that very quickly. If I jump into my SQL developer, and hopefully you can see that right here. Let me try to squeeze that in there. All right. So let's squeeze this. So quickly, what I'm going to show you, and I got prepared. So here, that's why I have these three tables showing up. So what do we have here? Here are all the files that I've uploaded with my drop zone. So here's the file name and the file type. I keep going to the right. Of course, we don't see much, but here's my blob content. So inside that field, here's my Excel spreadsheet. So that's the first step. The second step is in my PL SQL package, which Insum provides. What I was able to do is say, okay, go back to that blob and expand the values that I have in that Excel spreadsheet. So what I end up having is for every sheet, every cell becomes a record. So you can see here that row 2, column 2, I have actual flag, and if you keep going on that row, well, there's nothing, so it was null. And then the value showed up at one point. And then the next line, I had data access set, and then I had all sorts of other things, my vision operation ledger, the category, and so on and so forth. So every cell become a record where you have the row and the column. So once you have that done, then finally, all you have to do with your PL SQL is parse the right information that can be done very easily by either row and column or by looking at a specific string when you find the text, and then you know that the field value will be somewhere else, and then you just plug it into your GL interface, and off you go. So I know it's like super quick and high level, but the concept, that's what the process was to go from Excel into the GL interface. Hope that was able to answer your question. I have other questions in that chat window. Miroslav is saying, I like SAP consultant that turns EBS. Well, I'm happy I turned over to EBS because SAP is like trying to fix a BMW compared to a Chevrolet, so much easier. Murali, can we do the same for custom web EDIs? Well, you surely can. Really, all we're talking about here is that we have an Excel spreadsheet that has some data, and you want to extract that data and do something about it. So, like you said, in your next line, you know, it becomes data at that point, and you do whatever you want to do. Can you show an example on how you are using APEX to publish and consume RESTful services? No, because right now excuse me, sorry, my cold. We're running out of time, but this is actually a very, very, very good subject for another webinar where we can show you in detail how you could do that. And really, it's not that complicated. So thank you for that question, because that will probably be our next webinar where you can see how that can be done, and much easier to expose the data that way than going through your SOA gateway or business events and so on in EBS. So for now, I'm sorry I cannot show that, but in the very near future, we'll be able to show you something. Prasanna, 2 questions. Do we still configure and download the web EDI files or just use the upload feature of APEX? And the second question, how do users review failure after uploading the web EDI file? So first part, you don't have to download the web EDI file. The reason I did is just to present kind of a structure of how it could look like using something that already exists. But you can create your own structure, and since this is all custom, then you'll be able to parse the data any way you want. So either or, you can start from a web EDI and just delete everything from a macro point of view and connection, or start from your own scratch Excel file. And how do users review the failures? So like I said, my prototype doesn't have much, but at the end of the process, after I waited, of course I would have to wait for my concurrent program to be over, then I can jump to a next page in my APEX application, and I have probably an interactive report or some sort of a page that can show from the table or the API that downloaded the errors, what errors do I have, and even to a point where we probably can fix the error and resubmit. So this becomes a little bit more involved and totally possible for sure. It's just a question of finding where these errors would end up after you use your API or your interface table upload feature. So I think we have covered all the questions that that we had. I'm still looking to make sure that we have everything, and I think we have covered them up. So I know we have exceeded our time, unfortunately, but we had a lot of good questions, so that was good. And if there's no further question, I'm gonna thank you all for attending this webinar. Hopefully you really enjoyed it. And once again, feel free to visit our website, look at other webinars that we have recorded there and blogs that we have posted. And again, I highly recommend that you come see us at the different conferences that I have indicated. That way we have a chance to talk a little bit more in details about the issues you have or the opportunities you want us to work with you. And we'll be more than happy to exchange on your subject and see the people real life. So on that good note, I wish you a very good day and hope to talk to you soon. Bye now.